I wanted to shrink back in fear, to try to disappear into the mattress again and wait for the thing to leave. Then I felt the piercing cold white stone against my chest. The cross. I clutched it in my hand and kept my eyes on the hood. The figure showed no reaction. The sulfuric stench was so strong I was on the verge of gagging. With my free hand, I grabbed my flashlight, pointed it at the figure, and turned it on. I heard something like a guttural cry, and then the cabin was empty. The thing was gone, as was the stench. What the fuck? I muttered to myself as my body relaxed. It was short-lived. With the robed figure gone, my flashlight was now shining on Adam's bed, his empty bed. I jumped out of my sleeping bag and swept my light around the cabin. All the other boys were still asleep in their bunks. Only Adam was gone. He could have gone to the bathroom. That was the reason he had the bed closest to the door, after all. But after what had happened the week before at the girls' cabins, I had to be sure. I quickly threw my clothes and shoes on and walked outside, and towards the bathroom I inhaled sharply as I saw that there were no lights on inside, and my walk picked up into a jog. I went into the bathroom, triggering the automatic lights to come on, and called out Adam's name. Nothing. Shit. I left the bathroom and briskly walked back to the cabins, shining my light around the surrounding trees and bushes. Despite our frequent condemnations of it, campers loved to use nature to relieve themselves, even when a bathroom was 50 feet away. I called out for Adam again, and then again. There was no sign of him. My heart was racing and my breath was incredibly short. Fuck. Where was he? Had something happened to him? I ran through the area, weaving around the cabins, looking for any sign of him. Not a thing. Not again. I heard the sound of flaps rustling and turned to see Jordan sticking his head out of his cabin. Are you okay? I shook my head. One of my campers is missing. He flinched. We should get Donald. I really wanted to agree. It was the sensible thing to do. But I hesitated, and Jordan obviously noticed. Why don't you want to get him? His voice was less accusatory and more curious. Because I think I know where he is, I said, and Donald won't believe me. He stepped back into his cabin. Half a minute later, he stepped back out, fully dressed and holding a flashlight. Let's go. We moved quickly from the cabins, going across the field to the main lodge. We kept our lights off until we were behind the lodge. I found the path in seconds. Despite the urgency, I paused as I took the first step into the dark, overgrown path. What exactly were we about to confront? This wasn't like previous visits where I was going during the day or for investigation. This time I was hoping, expecting, to find someone there. And maybe not alone. I looked over at Jordan, who nodded at me. I stepped into the path, walking slowly and as quietly as I could. Could demons hear? Or would they just sense my presence? Shit. I was actually asking myself these questions. Deep down inside, I clearly believed that I was going up against something beyond this world, and evil at that. After about a minute of walking, the smell hit us. We shared a glance but said nothing. I was breathing like I just ran a marathon. I tried to distract myself with thinking about how the last time I had been here, Kyle had tried to kiss me, and wouldn't it be funny if Jordan had done the same? Ha ha ha. 'Cause he's so religious, right? And he wasn't that bad-looking of a guy, and I sure had a tendency to stick it in crazy and... From deeper in the forest came the cracking of sticks. I froze and had to cover my mouth to keep from screaming. I shone my light in the direction of the noise, but of course it didn't reveal anything but a few tree trunks. I turned back and kept going. Every step felt like climbing a mountain. My head was light and my heart pounding so hard I was afraid the demon, or whatever it was, would hear it. Damn it, what the hell was I doing? We'd gone another minute, and probably taken all of 20 steps, when a loud screech came from what I think was the direction of the burnt place. It was like a wounded, angry animal crying out. Then came more sticks breaking in the darkness. Oh, what the fuck? What in the ever-loving fuck? Jordan was suddenly right behind me. Pray, he said. In a louder voice he said, I know you're out there, evil one, and in the name of Jesus, I command you to leave. Yes, I added, my voice shaking so much more than his. God save us, our Father in heaven. Holy, 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 Lord God Almighty. He was singing now. Early in the morning our songs shall rise to thee, God in three persons, blessed Trinity. I felt a small sense of relief and found the strength to keep going. As I took small, slow steps through the bumpy path, I grabbed the cross around my neck and tried to recall any Bible verse that I could quote. "The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He makes me lieth in greenest pastures." It felt like we had been walking for an hour. Where was the burnt place? I tried to remember the path's layout from my previous journeys, but at this point it felt as unfamiliar as it had ever been. 5 steps, a turn, another 10 steps, another bend. Jordan singing hymns behind me. Movement in the trees beyond us. I had to keep going. The stench of the sulfur was becoming overwhelming as I went around one more curve. My shaking flashlight revealed the end of the trees just up ahead. Finally, I grabbed Jordan's hand, because there was no fucking chance I could take those last few steps on my own, and pressed ahead. 20 feet, 10 feet, 5. And then we were out of the woods and in the clearing. We both shone our lights around, looking for Adam, I hoped, or a demon, I feared. We saw neither, just the ruins, which now seemed bigger and more twisted in its place. I simultaneously felt relief and fear. If no one was here, what had been making those noises? And where was my camper? I let go of Jordan's hand and slowly walked around the debris, as I had in my past visits. Jordan stayed with me, but kept his light on the forest behind us, as though he were expecting something to jump out at us at any second. It was a possibility. I walked around the corner, my light still shining on the burnt place and my eyes never leaving it. It was only in my peripheral vision that I caught a sock on the grass, close to the forest's edge. I swung my light to it. Oh my fuck. A meter away from the sock, laying in the grass, was Adam. I dashed over and fell on my knees next to his body. "Adam, are you okay?" He didn't respond. In the darkness I couldn't tell if he was even still breathing. Oh God. No. I put my fingers on his neck, trying to find his pulse. Fuck. I took first aid. I had to find it. But why couldn't I? My vision became blurry as tears streamed down my face. Please, God, no. Don't let this happen. I'd never forgive myself. Not if I could have stopped this thing. My fingers went under his jaw and I felt a steady pulse. Oh, thank fuck. I put my hand over his mouth and felt his faint breath against it. Good. I gently put my hand on his cheek and shook his head. "Hey, Adam, you with us?" He slowly stirred and opened his eyes. What happened?" he asked groggily. He shifted around, noticing the dew on his pajamas. "Oh no, did I wet the bed?" I looked back at Jordan. "Not exactly. Do you know where you are right now?" He sat up and looked around. "This isn't the cabin. Where are we? Was I pranked?" "You're in the middle of the forest," I said. He gave me a blank look. "Do you remember coming here?" He looked around again. "Is this a dream? I thought I was in bed." No recollection. That was ultimately a good thing, even if it provided me with no explanation. Jordan spoke up. "We should get back to the cabins. These parts aren't safe at night." Understatement of the summer. I stood up and helped my camper to his feet. Given that he had no shoes, I offered him a piggyback ride. He climbed on my back and we started toward the path. As we did, I saw a bright light moving within the forest, along with the sound of cracking branches. I pointed my flashlight in its direction and clenched my free hand into a fist. If this thing wanted my camper, it was going to have to go through me first. The light got closer and closer as I readied myself for a fight. Amazing how quickly fear vanished when I had a kid to protect. Finally, it reached the clearing, and Donald burst out from the trees. He looked from me to Jordan and back to me again as his jaw dropped. "What are you guys doing here?" I pointed to the camper on my back. "We found him here." Donald's eyes went wide. What was he doing here?" Our silence made it clear that there was no answer. "Probably sleepwalking, I bet. We often have campers who do that, especially if they have other sleeping issues too." I felt bad for Adam, but if using his bedwetting against him worked, so be it. "Now let's go. You all should be in bed." We walked up to him and he led us back down the path. As we went, I noticed that he had the rosary I'd seen hanging in his cabin wrapped around his hand. I wanted to ask about it, but I feared that any question I'd propose would be met with some of his own, such as why I was at the burnt place in the middle of the night, or how I'd known Adam would be there. I was exhausted the next day, but Adam was as lively and spirited as he'd been before. Whatever events had taken place that had resulted in him ending up at the burnt place, he sure as hell didn't remember them, and there weren't any physical marks or bruises on him. Plus, either he'd bought Donald's story about sleepwalking, or he was too dazed to remember everything, because he didn't again mention what had happened that night. Thank God. I only had a chance to speak to Donald once after that night. He was absent from half the meals and nearly all the activities, and when I approached him to talk about what had happened, he simply said, "Not now. We'll talk soon." On the bright side, though, I now have Jordan squarely in my corner. He's been checking in on me multiple times a day and even came into my cabin to pray with my campers on the final night. And he's scheduled an impromptu meeting with any interested staff for tonight to discuss everything that's happened. Speaking of which, I need to get back to the bus. So that's this week's update. I've got 2 weeks left to figure what the hell is going on here. I just really, really hope it isn't what I think it is. And that's not the end of the story. If you enjoyed the video, be sure to hit the like button and share your thoughts in the comments below. For more exciting content, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Then, his tone dropped. I know this summer has had its share of adventure and excitement. Please spend this final week being safe and making sure all the kids here are cared for. And I want to be crystal clear on this. No one is to go in or around the old wilderness shed. That means none of the forest surrounding it. It is not a safe place, and once the summer is over, we're going to look at how to get rid of it. At the time, it felt like the closest he'd ever come to a tacit admission that the burnt place, and whatever was haunting it, needed to be removed from camp for good. It was a tiny bit reassuring. I, however, was still a wreck. My encounter on Thursday was still hanging in my mind, and I didn't need any further instructions from Donald to tell me to avoid whatever thing had come at me. I kept thinking back to how I had escaped, the bottle of water Donald had given me. He had to have known what it would do. But more than that, what if I hadn't had it with me? What would have happened to me then? The thing had said that I was not forgiven. What would that judgment have entailed? These questions swirled in my head, but I was able to push them aside with a singular focus on one thing: protecting the camp. My nights were sleepless, and I was waking up every few hours, but that was fine. It meant I could get up, look around for any giant robed figures, or anyone helping them, ensure that my own campers were okay, and then go back to bed feeling a little bit better. I didn't trust anyone else to do it, especially anyone from the 10 of us who had been at the burnt place the previous week. Given that all of us were subsequently targeted with the burn marks on our tabins, there was a real possibility of a turncoat, a Judas, if you will, within that group. That even included Jordan, as much as I wanted to lean on him. I could only trust myself. During the day, I was always on alert, as if I were waiting for the robed figure to emerge from behind a tree or appear in the middle of the field. There was also the terrifyingly real threat that it could do other kinds of evil in the camp. It made me thankful to be at the rock wall, where I could keep an eagle eye out for any fraying ropes or loose carabiners. Unfortunately, the fitful nights and intense days led me to a point of total exhaustion, and halfway through Wednesday, I began to feel dizzy. A few hours later, I collapsed and started vomiting. The nurse chalked it up to a combination of heat stroke and fatigue, and I was bedridden for the next 2 days. Honestly, it was almost for the better. I slept in half-day increments, giving me little time to worry about what was going on outside my tabin. The other counselors were really good about taking on my final group of boys, and in my brief waking moments, I figured to myself that enough of them had to be capable of protecting the kids. And then I'd go back to sleep. I woke up Friday morning feeling about 60%, which for the final day of camp is the equivalent of 150%. I taught my last rock climbing course and watched as 3 kids bested the overhang, and then in the afternoon we had the final game of Capture the Flag of the summer, and thanks to my renewed energy, I was able to run the flag back to win us the game. I know it's not the most important detail, but it was the first time I won anything at camp. It felt good. I had mixed feelings as dinner rolled around and we gorged on roast beef and mashed potatoes. The last dinner of each week was always something pretty great. On one hand, yes, I was glad the summer was ending, and I was going to get as far away from this place as possible. On the other, damn it if I didn't feel like this summer had been something special. Demons and the weird shit aside, I got to spend 8 weeks hanging out with some awesome kids and be a role model and whatnot for them. I would honestly miss watching the kids reach the top of the rock wall for the first time, or playing around with them in the lake, or the late-night discussions we'd have, even if they tended to spiral into silliness. Yorniwana was a weird place, but I was going to miss it. Or, at least, parts of it. After dinner, Donald approached me and asked if I'd come back to his cabin. He promised it would be brief. I followed him there, and once again sat in the chair while he took the bed. "How are you feeling?" he asked. "A lot better," I said. "The resting was what I needed. Sucks that I missed the last few days here, though." He laughed. "I'm glad you had fun today, at least." He leaned forward. "Anyway, I just wanted to quickly say thanks for everything you did this summer. I know that there was a lot that went on, but you handled it like a champ, especially for a first-time counselor too. I hope you enjoyed being up here, all things considered." I chuckled. It was memorable, that's for sure. "Well, thanks again. If I don't see you, safe travels home, and best of luck at school this year." "Thanks," I said. I got up from my chair and was about to leave when the rosary, still hanging above the mini fridge, caught my eye. "Hey, could I get a bottle of water?" What the hell, right? At worst, it would keep me hydrated, and at best, it would give me one more weapon for the final night. He cocked an eyebrow. "You bet." He grabbed one from the fridge and tossed it to me. "Have a good last night here." "You too?" I left and headed back to the Tabin. There was one last campfire, and I have to admit that I teared up a bit as a few of the counselors sung a song about God and stars and saying goodbye, and then we watched as they extinguished the fire for the final time of 2019. My campers were, thankfully, pretty exhausted from the day and were quick to get into their beds and fall asleep. I, on the other hand, was not as inclined. I laid in my bunk, staring up at the dark ceiling, my mind spinning. I had made it. I was at the finish line. I had survived the summer. And yet, all the questions about what was going on here still swirled in my mind. And exacerbating all of them was Kate's email. Right. I suppose I should tell you about her email. It was long, like easily 5,000 words, and it took me several sittings just to go through all of it, and then several more to go over it again, and again. I'd copy and paste it, but I don't want to make your inbox crash when you get this. But she started by apologizing for not reaching out to me earlier, and for hanging up when I'd called her a few weeks ago. She had been in a bad place, and my late-night call hadn't done much to help. In fact, she wasn't sure about emailing me until a friend notified her about a story on Reddit that seems to be about you. Apparently one of you, looking at you, Drew, has been posting this online. For the record, I'm okay with this, but if it's ever published, I want a cut. Kate saw it and realized she had to contact me to let me know what had happened with her disappearance, though she also said she was glad to have an excuse. She then revealed to me something she had wanted to ever since I met her, but was too ashamed to. Last year, Kate's older sister had been killed in a gruesome car crash. Kate had gone into a deep depression afterwards and had started cutting herself. I had noticed some scars on her wrists when I met her, but I didn't feel like that was something to share with all of you. She'd also had nightmares where she was stalked by a large demon with twisted horns and glowing red eyes. She'd avoided going to Yorniwana last year. The memories of going back to a camp where she and her sister had spent so many summers together were too much, but thought that she'd be able to handle herself this year. And she had. Until I mentioned seeing the robed figure for the first time. That, she wrote, was like a switch snapping in her head. All she could think about was the demon of her own nightmares, which she associated with her sister's death. And that led to all the memories of camp with her sister flooding back to her. I'll quote her for this next part, because I can't recap it any better. I guess I had been suppressing so many of these memories, and so much pain, because it just kept crashing over me. That last day I saw you, when I didn't speak to you, It was because I was afraid I would just break down then and there, and I didn't want you to see me like that. Then that night, I was just so overwhelmed and scared and angry, and so I went out behind the cabins and cut myself. It felt relieving for like 5 seconds before I realized what I had done. I was so ashamed of myself, because I had been good for over a year. I remember running into the forest and just falling to the ground and crying. Some of the other counselors found me, and we stayed up all night talking. And then I called my parents at like 3 a.m., and they came and picked me up. I want you to know that I don't blame you at all for what happened. And I'm really sorry I never told you about this, or that I didn't say goodbye. I really wish I had. But I do have some news. I'm going to be going to U of Windsor in the fall. I know it's not super close to Guelph, but there is a Via train. If you're up for it, I'd love to grab a coffee, or maybe something stronger once we've settled in. I feel like I owe you that much. The email had given me a ton of mixed feelings. I was really glad that she was okay, and that there was a reasonable explanation behind what had happened. And the fact that she wanted to go on a date was pretty sweet. But I also felt terrible for her, to have kept all her emotions bottled up, and the fact that I had been the one to trigger her put this heavy weight on my chest. I tried to tell myself that there was nothing I could have done, that hell, she didn't even blame me, but looking back on it, I just wish I'd somehow known then what I know now. And then there was the bigger issue at play. Her email did nothing to get me closer to all the weird shit that had happened in the weeks after she disappeared. The fact that I now knew why I had seen her running that night, why I'd heard the scream, and why I found blood on the trail afterward. None of it explained the missing campers, or the weird occurrences at the burnt place, or the claw marks, or the sulfur, or the cabin catching on fire. It was a coincidence, not an explanation. Lying in my bunk on that Friday night, I sighed at the thought. It was frustrating. I felt like I was completing a puzzle, the kind with no picture on the box, and even though I'd been able to put together a small section, I still couldn't tell what the image was. But I would be going home in 12 hours. What more could I do? I needed a drink. But, since still had a day before I'd be able to drink a beer, I rolled over and grabbed Donald's water bottle from the ledge. It was still full, and I figured I could have a bit and use whatever remained to fight off the demon if I needed to. I opened it and took a swig. And, as the water swished in my mouth, I froze, letting it just sit there. My mind was racing again. If it wasn't putting the puzzle pieces together, at least looking at them from a different angle. It was Kate's disappearance, and me thinking I'd seen something otherworldly that night, that had led me to the burnt place originally. And now that I had a rational explanation for it, could there be the same thing for everything else that had happened? Was that possible? I went over every bizarre thing that had happened since I came up 8 weeks earlier. The whole time, I had thought that something otherworldly was going on here, something supernatural and devastating. A demon. But a camper much braver and smarter than me was confident that if demons did exist, they were not stronger than a god who had to exist as well. I finally swallowed the water and then sighed and shook my head. I already knew what this was leading to. I had made a promise to Ian that I would protect the camp. I was going to leave, but in 10 months there would once again be kids here. Smelly, loud, annoying, bedwetting, sleep-ruining, energy-draining kids who I nevertheless cared deeply about. Loved even. I owed it to them to figure this thing out. I stood up and grabbed my flashlight. There was only one thing I could do now. I had to go back to the burnt place. Sorry to keep you all waiting. These last few days have been beyond crazy. I've either been sleeping, doing interviews, or sitting on my bed, curled up in the fetal position, rocking back and forth. That last one is a joke. Sort of. Honestly, I'm not even sure if I'm allowed to share all of this with you, especially since one of you has been posting this on Reddit. Though I guess you can say it's all fiction, eh, Drew? It's just nice to be typing this on a computer instead of my phone. Before I finish this story, thanks to all of you for keeping me sane this summer. Being able to share all this chaos with you was really helpful, and I appreciate all the supportive emails you sent me back. I'm obviously never returning to Yorniwana or probably any summer camp ever again. But oh boy, was this summer life-changing. Anyway, I'm sure you're all dying to find out what happened, so here goes. It was around midnight on Friday as I left the cabin, flashlight in one hand and bottle of holy water in the other. For what felt like the 10th time that summer, I crossed the darkened field, past Donald's cabin, and went behind the lodge. At this point, I had gone into the hidden path so many times, it may as well have been illuminated with neon arrows. I stopped in front of it, took a deep breath, swished the water around in the bottle, and headed in. The smell hit me within 30 seconds. I tried my best to think nothing of it and pressed on. I passed the spot where I had had my encounter the week before. The bits of my remaining vomit gave it away. A little bit further, I walked around the corner where we had found Nathan, curled up and barely able to speak. Another minute of walking, and I went past the area where Jordan and I had done our impromptu prayer/hymn session. The sulfuric stench was strong as ever as I reached the final stretch of the path. So far, I hadn't seen or heard anything. No snapping branches, no guttural screams, no fire or flames. I wanted to relax, but I reminded myself that it had been the same way when the 10 of us had tried to drive the demon out, and it turned out we hadn't been alone after all. I made it to the end and walked out into the clearing. It was another cloudy night, giving me very little visibility without my flashlight. I swept the beam across the trees around me. I'm not sure what I was looking for, maybe just reassurance that I was alone, and then focused it on the rubble in the middle. How many times had I heard that it was cursed? Demonic? A portal to hell? And yet for all the times I'd been here, I'd never actually gone into it. I circled the debris, trying to find the best way through. It was strange how all of the metal and wood was positioned so that there were no openings to the empty center in the middle, nor could anyone try climbing over without getting seriously cut up. Very strange. I regretted not wearing long sleeves, which may have made it a bit easier to climb, and considered going back to my cabin to get a sweater and jeans. But as I went around again, looking for any sort of way in, I noticed that a small section of the rubble seemed to be shaking slightly. There was a breeze going through the trees, but nothing that would cause hundreds of pounds of junk to move. I approached it, grabbed a piece of metal that was jutting out, and shook it myself. The section, about 3 feet of the rubble, moved back and forth by about an inch. I could hear it banging against the other parts, as though it were a gate, I said aloud, and every gate needed a latch. I shone my light along the section, looking for just that. It took me a few minutes, but I found it on the inside of the rubble, half concealed by a piece of rotting wood. I flicked it open and pushed on the metal. It swung inward. It was bizarre, to say the least, to see this big hunk of steel and lumber basically floating above the ground. I could see the big, rusty hinges from which it connected to the rest of the wall of debris, as well as the steel beams that the junk had been attached to make this hidden gate. I narrowed my eyes as I walked through the new opening. Who had made this? And why? I was afraid I already knew the answer. I was now standing in the middle of the burnt place. My feet moved through the ash and dust as I shone my flashlight on the ground, looking for any further clues to its mystery. For a few minutes, I couldn't find anything. It was all just a lot of black ground and dirt. I didn't stop. There was no way I could come this far and not have more to discover. As I paced the area for the 3rd time, I noticed my footing suddenly change at one of the far ends. It went from hard and slippery to soft and rubbery. I crouched down and examined it, both with my flashlight and my hands. It was a square, about 3 feet on each side, made of some synthetic material, but on level with the rest of the ground and covered in a thin layer of ash. It would have been impossible to find if you hadn't been looking for it. So what was it for? As I moved my hands along the edges, I found a slight hole in the ground. I shone my light in it. Under the material, about an inch from the edge, was a handle and a combination lock. I tried the handle. The square lifted slightly and then was caught by the lock. There was a crack in the woods behind me. I looked back for a few seconds before returning to the lock. It was slightly obscured, but I could see it was a standard spinning lock, the kind I'd cracked a few times when pulling pranks in high school. I'd learned how to tell when the lock had hit the right number. Could I do it again? It wasn't like I had any other choice. I reached down and began to spin it to the right slowly. After about a turn and a half, I felt it give a little resistance. Good. Now the other way. 2 turns, and I didn't feel anything. I had to try again, and again. On my 5th attempt, I heard a satisfying click and felt the lock come open in my hand. I pulled it from the latches and put it in my pocket. Then I grabbed the handle and yanked it up. It opened with surprising ease, revealing a set of stairs leading into a large hole in the ground. I took a second to just gaze down it. What the fuck? There was nowhere to go but down. I shone my flashlight into the hole and slowly walked down the steep steps. The hatch closed above me, aided by a pneumatic hinge that slowed its closing. I went deeper down, my flashlight the only illumination. What was this place? An old bomb shelter? A secret hideout? I reached the bottom and shone my light around. It was a small room, about the same size as a cabin, with concrete walls and a metal ceiling. To my right was a twin bed with a single sheet and metal frames at both the head and foot. Attached to the frames were leather cuffs with buckles. On the wall above the bed were several posters, Transformers, Star Wars and Avengers. Along the back wall were more chains and straps, hanging from pegs. I examined them and then looked back at the bed. Was someone coming down here to do some kinky sex or BDSM? I briefly considered that maybe Yorniwana was actually a front for a sex cult, and this was where it all went down. But I knew it wasn't the explanation. I feared I already knew what the real one was. My fears were amplified as I turned to the wall on my left, opposite the bed. A large wooden chest sat against it, with a tall camera tripod next to it. I felt my breath go short. I lifted open the chest with a shaking hand and looked in. The first thing I saw was a large metal rod with a separate piece at one end. I picked it up and looked it over. The metal piece was a massive, multi-taloned claw, a branding iron. It was a branding iron. I put it back and looked over the several jars of white powder sitting in one of the back corners. From where I was, and even with the jars closed, I could smell the burning sulfuric scent coming from them. There were also some garments of clothing. I pulled them out. A Boy Scout uniform, a girl's pink dress, a miniature sailor suit. Shit. I was about to put the costumes back when I saw a small black box that had been underneath them. I pulled it out and opened it. A video camera was inside. Fuck. I already knew what was on the camera. There was no doubt in my mind. But I had to see. I had to know. I flipped out the camera's little screen and found the recorded videos. I took a deep breath, gritted my teeth, and hit play on the first one. Within 10 seconds, I'd closed the screen and had to resist throwing the camera across the room. I forced myself to keep watching. I was now a witness. It was exactly what I thought. And yet, worse than I could imagine. There were about 20 videos on that camera, and I watched a few seconds of each. I had to know what campers Donald had abused. Nathan, Kyle's camper who had gone missing, he was there. Now I understood why he had been inconsolable when we'd found him. I recognized several more campers from rock climbing. I remembered one of them had become extremely homesick halfway through the week. Was this the reason? And each of the other kids, both boys and girls, I was sure I'd seen at some point during the summer. These had all been made in the last 2 months. Jesus. I hate to admit it, but I felt a tiny bit of relief when I didn't recognize any of the campers who had been in my Tabin, especially Adam. I felt a chill go down my spine as I realized that we had probably saved him when we found him lying on the grass. Thank fucking God. Too bad I couldn't say the same for the rest of these kids. When I'd finished going through the videos, I stumbled back and sat on the bed as tears formed in my eyes. My God. This is what had happened at the camp, right under my nose. Those poor kids. At the end of the only video I watched all the way through, after he had, and I'll just fucking say it, raped a girl. Donald looked at her and said that if she told anyone, he'd share the video with her family and everyone in her school. I thought back to the first night I'd been with my campers, how they'd all agreed that their biggest fear was an embarrassing video of them going viral. Donald had threatened them with something 1,000,000 times worse. No wonder they had kept quiet. I wiped away my tears and looked at the camera in my hand. I took a deep breath and felt my skin get hot. That piece of shit. That monster. I had to make him pay. And I would. I fucking would. The hatch at the top of the stairs suddenly opened. It had to be him. I moved to the other wall and pushed my body up against the corner, close to the staircase. I heard footsteps coming down the stairs, followed by a flick as several ceiling lights came on. I had missed that on my way in. Donald emerged and looked around, spotting me. He snorted. I should have guessed. The rage that filled me as I stared at him, knowing what he had done, was stronger than anything I'd felt in my life. "Fuck you," was all I could breathe out. He looked at the open chest, and then at the camera in my hand. "So you know then, I thought I'd had scared you away. Guess I should have resorted to more drastic measures." A psychopath. He was a complete psychopath. Talking about this like it was some sort of game. "You're dead," I seethed out. "You're going to die in prison." For a brief moment he seemed to show a twinge of concern, but he immediately recovered. "If that's the road you want to go down, you're welcome to try." This wasn't the Donald I had spent the last 8 weeks with. No, this guy, the real Donald, was calculating and sinister. Evil. "But perhaps you and I can come to an arrangement." He paused, as though he were waiting for me to say something. I stayed silent. "I know how expensive university is these days. I'm sure I could help you." "Shut up!" I couldn't contain myself anymore. "You living piece of shit. You fucker. I saw those videos. I saw what you did to them. And you think you could pay me?" I could feel my blood boiling in my veins. "It's over. You are done. I am going to end this, right now." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a sizable switchblade. "Like I said, you're welcome to try." In retrospect, it was almost funny, him threatening my life as though it would do anything to put me off. At that moment, in that underground room, he was scared and I was angry. And it turns out that when it comes to fear versus anger, anger is a hell of a lot more powerful. I grabbed the nearby tripod with my free hand and swung it at him. He was able to block it with his arm, but not the second, third, or fourth ones. I connected the final swing to the side of his head, and he went down to his knees. I threw the tripod aside and started pummeling him with my fists. Some of you may remember that I played AAA hockey in high school and had a bit of a temper on the ice. That temper came roaring back as I hit him over and over, until his face was covered with bruises and blood. All I could think about was those kids and what he had done to them. With every punch, I felt a tiny bit of justice. He deserved it. Eventually, when I had reached a point where I was afraid I was close to killing him, I stopped hitting him and instead pushed him back and onto the bed. I tied the leather straps around his hands as tightly as I could. As I did, he coughed out a laugh and muttered something, though I couldn't tell with all the blood gurgling in his mouth. "You think this is all a game?" I spat. "Well, you lost. And you know what, Donald? It's your own fault. Next time you give someone hallucinogens in a water bottle, seal the bottle up again. Otherwise, he'll notice when he twists open the next one you give him." I turned to leave, but he coughed out. I looked back at him. His blood-soaked lips were smiling. "Fuck you." I raised my fists up and pounded them into his chest. I felt several cracks beneath my hands. He let out several short, pained wheezes. I spat at him and then went up the stairs, shutting off the lights as I passed the switch. I pushed the hatch open and climbed out. Once the hatch had closed, I fished the lock back out of my pocket and put it through the latches. Donald wasn't going anywhere. The camera was still in my hand, and though it was covered in blood, it seemed to work. I'd left my flashlight in the bunker, so the walk back through the path wasn't easy, but I didn't let up, no matter how branches I took to the face. I reached the lodge, broke into the med center with a hard push to the door, and called the cops. I told them that I was at Camp Yorniwana, and I had evidence of child abuse and the creation of child pornography. Then I sat on the lodge's steps and waited. As much as I wanted to show Beth or Smokey, I didn't know who I could trust. Only one car initially arrived, around 1 in the morning. I explained to them what I had seen and showed them the videos on the camera. An hour later, there were a dozen cars in the parking lot, with both OPP and RCMP officers walking around the grounds. I watched as a team of them went down the path towards the burnt place, guns raised, and then I turned around and saw Beth and Smokey talking to several officers. Beth had covered her hands over her face and was crouched down, crying. I felt a huge amount of sadness for her. If she'd had no idea about it, and it sure seemed like this was a surprise to her, how would she ever be able to forgive herself? After someone took my statement, I was told I could go back to my cabin. I gave Beth a sympathetic look and walked away. In the washroom, I cleaned the blood off of my hands and face, and then I went back to my bunk. I sat down on it and looked around the room at each of my campers. Despite what I had seen, despite the truth I now knew about this camp, I felt a sense of relief. I'd solved the mystery. I'd stopped Donald. Good. I stayed sitting on my bed for God knows how long, and at some point must have I drifted off, because I suddenly found myself lying in my bed with the cloaked figure standing above me, its endless black face staring right into my eyes. I was scared for the first few seconds, as always, but then my wits returned to me. This was a vision. It wasn't real. It never had been. No, I whispered, and then it was gone. I rolled over and went back to sleep. Morning arrived soon after, and I was surprised to find not a single police car or officer around as we lined up at the mess hall. For a moment, a terrifying moment, I wondered if I had dreamt everything, but when I saw the tread marks from all the cars on the gravel road, combined with a tired, distraught Beth at breakfast, I knew that it had all been real. When we had finished eating, Beth took to the microphone. She looked like a wreck, with dark circles under her puffy red eyes. Her voice was low and raspy. I just want to thank you all for a great week. And counselors, thank you for a great summer. There was cheering and applause. It was surreal. They had no idea what had just happened. This camp is a special place, isn't it? And I hope that it remains a special place, where good memories are made for a long time. How does that sound? More cheering. I hoped the same thing, but I knew that it wasn't true for at least 20 kids. As campers and staff alike began to leave, I said my goodbyes and made promises to keep in touch. I gave Jordan a big hug and thanked him for his help. And I did a quick final walk of the area. The rock wall, the lake, the cabins, and then grabbed my bags and waited in the parking lot. Just after everyone had left, a black SUV pulled up and I got in. The two RCMP officers in the front asked me question after question as they drove me back home. And now I'm here. From what I've been told in the multiple interviews I've had with the Mounties child exploitation officers, Donald has been arrested, and a forensics team has been going over Yorniwana with a fine-toothed comb. They've been locating and talking to each of the kids who were in the videos, and while they couldn't tell me upright, shit, it sounds bad. At some point, I'm probably going to be called in to testify against him. I can't fucking wait. In the meantime, I'm heading back to Guelph in a few days, and I'm already looking for a therapist, because God am I going to need one. Hopefully the start of classes will help me take my mind off of things, and if it doesn't, I have other things I need to do, like make a trip to Hamilton to see a 14-year-old cancer survivor, or make myself available for a girl in Windsor who owes me a drink and a bit of an explanation. Honestly, there is a part of me that misses, and will continue to miss, Yorniwana. Beth, and so many other people I talked to, were right. Camp is a special place. And though I'm now back in civilization, with its cell reception and climate control and food varieties, I know that this experience is going to stay with me. And I do mean the full experience. I'm not going to need a therapist to work through the late-night conversations I had with my campers, or the joy I felt when I saw a kid reach the top of the rock wall, or the sheer fun of playing capture the flag, or swimming in the freezing cold lake. I'm glad that I was able to protect that experience for future campers. I just wish I'd somehow figured it out sooner. One last thing. When I sent you the first email, 2 months ago, I said that I wasn't sure about God and that I didn't believe in demons. And that has changed. I'm still not sure about God, but I absolutely believe in demons now. Because I met one, and I worked for him, and I trusted him, and I hope he burns in hell.
That's the end of this story. If you found it engaging, please give it a thumbs up and don't forget to subscribe for more content like this.